Hello, BookTube. It's Wednesday, and that means New Comic Book Day, when dreamers like me go to their LCS, their local comic shop, in search of that elusive something. And it stays elusive. That's not exactly how that story's supposed to go. But I've mentioned on this channel on Comic Book Wednesdays that I tend to go in armed for Comic Book Wednesday. I go in forewarned. I look up new releases online first, the night before, to see how great an incentive I have to actually go to my LCS in the first place. I'm perfectly happy to go there and give them money. I'm perfectly happy to do that. But I'm not going to go on a random chance. My local comic shop is a little bit out of my way. So I did that last night. I looked at a couple of different sites online to find out a list and compare the two to make sure one person didn't get it wrong, of things that were coming out today in my local comic shop. And there are three things that would tempt me to go to my LCS. The first one, and the rarest, is floppy issues, actual individual issues of an ongoing series that's so good that I don't care about the fact that it might be collected down the line. Now the comic book industry is sort of geared towards those graphic novel collections, and a lot of fans don't, and myself, I've been one of them from many times. A lot of fans don't want to pay for the same stuff twice, so they do what's called trade waiting. They wait for the trade paperback. They know it's coming, so they don't have to worry about missing this stuff. They just have to wait a bit, and then they buy it as a trade paperback, and they don't bother with the individual issues. I've gone back and forth on both sides of that issue. Sometimes I think, the trade paperbacks are more durable. They can go on a bookshelf. It makes more sense for you to have that. Other times I think, no. If a writer, an artist, and editor are doing the work to make a comic absolutely fantastic from month to month, then they deserve you to read it in that format and just keep it in that format. Don't bother with the trade paperback. I go back and forth, but to tell you the truth, in most recent years, it has been such a small consideration because most times, any given week or month, there hasn't been a comic book that would tempt me in that way. But that's one thing. A floppy comic is one thing that would tempt me to go to my LCS. Another thing is a trade paperback. The trades that I just mentioned, where some run on something, whether it's new or old, is collected into a paperback. And the third thing is an omnibus. A great big fat thing, a hardcover, something that's meant to be a doorstop. There are some great YouTube channels that are devoted to those kinds of big hardcover productions, and I love them myself. Whether they're new or old, provided they hit a sweet spot, I will gladly shell out the money. And the advanced look that I did for the comic shop today had all three of those things. So I thought, okay, it's not freezing cold. The comic shop's not that far out of your way, so you can go because you're going to get all three of these things. There was the promise of not one, not two, but three Robert E. Howard individual floppy comic books. Robert E. Howard his creations are having a renaissance in comic books right now, and that is partially due to the fact that Marvel has just reacquired the rights to a lot of Robert E. Howard products. Conan, Savage Sword of Conan, they've relaunched both of them. They used to do them 50 years ago. They're doing them again. And also a series called Age of Conan. I'm curious to know what will happen with Age of Conan. Right now it's Belit, the pirate queen of the Black Coast. But I'm wondering if once her story arc is over, that the Age of Conan is just going to go on to other Robert E. Howard Conan era characters. I'm curious to know. I'll be watching it closely. So there was that to draw me in. Today was 3 Conan comic books. But there were also 2 trade paperback collections. One was a fairly low-priced hardcover. The other was a trade paperback. The trade paperback was, I would show you pictures of them, but I currently don't have a working iPad. My iPad, my trusty iPad of 10 years, gave up the ghost. One of you very kindly found a first-generation iPad that you had just not used. You just traded up out of it, and it was otherwise perfectly useful, and you sent it to me, and I got a lot of good use out of it, but it, too, eventually gave up the ghost. I once again put out the call. If you have an iPad that you have since traded up out of and it's just sitting there in a kitchen drawer somewhere, feel free to send it to me. If you want, I will gladly recompense you with books. But so I don't have pictures to show you. But what the trade paperback that was scheduled to come out today and that I was curious to get, I would certainly have got it. Marvel Comics is doing themed trade paperback collections called Marvel Decades. They did one about the very earliest years of timely comics before it was even Marvel. They did the a decades volume for the beginning of the new age of Marvel Comics, the Stan Lee era of Marvel Comics. And the one that they were going to do today was the 80s, the 1980s. And not just any 1980s. It's not just the theme is the 1980s. The theme was also change. Because in the 1980s, a whole bunch of signature Marvel characters underwent radical changes. What at the time seemed like radical changes. The Incredible Hulk went from a rampaging green monster, a mindless green monster, to a kind of nefarious, fully intelligent, gray-skinned monster, like he was in the first few issues of his own book, when he was originally gray and not green. He wore a suit, he schemed, and the Gray Hulk, the issues that introduce him were part of this issue. Also, in this issue, Captain America gives up his star-spangled identity and becomes just the Captain, wearing mostly black and with a nondescript shield instead of his famous red, white, and blue shield, because he is temporarily badly disillusioned with the United States government. Not the first time that he was, and turns out not going to be the last time. But he takes the name of the Captain instead. Iron Man underwent a major redesign in armor, left behind the classic gold and red color scheme briefly for something else. I didn't really like the color scheme at all. Also, most famously of all, Spider-Man had a costume change where he had the all black Spider-Man costume with the white highlight Spider-Man symbol. That the costume turned out to be a sentient symbiote from another world, a sentient and sinister parasitic creature. But it didn't seem that way at first. It seemed at first Peter Parker gets the black costume when he's off planet. He gets it in an alien world as part of the Secret Wars. So at first it seemed like just an ideal thing, where you can make it disappear at will, where it generates web fluid so he doesn't need to anymore, where he can mentally will it to remove itself from just his head and leave it on the rest of his body, and a whole bunch of other things. It was a really dynamic look. It was a drastic change, but it was a really dynamic look. I remember looking at all of these changes, and this volume I think includes a lot of other things too. I remember looking at all of these changes and thinking, well, it's a mythology. Mythologies are made to be adapted and readapted, to be hammered and pounded and stretched out of shape. So I'll go along depending on what the writer does with all of this. And probably the best example of that is one of the other changes commemorated in this volume, which is Thor, who at one point in his own comic is cursed by Hela, the goddess of death. She can't kill him. She can't outright kill him until it's his time, until the fates will it. So she curses him by removing his incredible godlike durability. She gives him a normal level of durability for his body, which means that when he punches a concrete wall, he's going to shatter his hand and his arm all the way up to his shoulder. It means that when the absorbing man pounds him with a gigantic ball and chain, it's going to break the bones that it hits. And I was reading those issues. They are great issues. And for a while, Thor tries to cope. It doesn't end up being possible. It, in fact, very quickly becomes impossible. You realize once that he goes back to Earth with that curse on him, just how rough and tumble a life he really leads. But he doesn't want to give up his fight against the forces of injustice. So he forges a suit of armor, of mystical Asgardian armor, that covers virtually every inch of his body, and that is designed not only to protect him from harm, but also to help him move, because it becomes a kind of mystical exoskeleton as well. And it was a new look for Thor. It was a totally new look for Thor. The classic Thor in the Marvel Comics has bare arms. He's wearing a sleeveless top, skin-tight leotards on his legs, his head wide open except for a winged helmet that isn't any protection at all. All of a sudden, this Thor had not only a beard to cover up the scars on his face, but also a helmet covering the rest of his face, including his eyes, and gauntlets. and plate mail armor all over his body. And those issues were great. Every single time Thor took any kind of punishment in those issues, it meant something. Uh, until finally, climactically, he has a massive battle with the Midgard Serpent, and the final impact between the two of them is so great that it turns Thor's body to jelly. We're told it turns his body to sentient, aware, but totally formless jelly. It's inside this armor. The armor is just laying there on the ground. You can't even see a face anymore. It's just there's just a pile of goo inside it. But this trade paperback would also have that, where Thor dons that protective armor and doesn't look like Thor anymore. Briefly, that was the paperback, and the hardcover was the last collection of Astro City, which is a great comic book superhero production that is not Marvel or DC. Instead, it's a kind of homage and pastiche of all the great archetypes of both, and plenty others too. It's a whole new world of superheroes, supernatural beings, lost civilizations, desperate villains, masked vigilantes visiting marauding aliens, supernatural adventures, the whole 9 yards. I cannot praise Astro City high enough. It is an amazing, amazing reading experience. And it has had a speckled publication history, ran for a long, long time, stopped for a while, individual miniseries, individual issues. And then it had a run of interconnected stories that the creator and artist were kind of saying would be it for a while. And I read a couple of those and really liked them, and then fell out. I wasn't around comic books for a while. And the hardcover with a great Alex Ross cover, collecting all of those things, plenty of which I have not read, was out today. I think it's called Last Rites. It includes the 4-part follow-up to one of the greatest short stories in Astro City history. Also includes the adventures of a superhero character who's part man and part dog. And then, so those were the graphic novels. And then there was also a gigantic omnibus, a $125 omnibus of The Amazing Spider-Man, written by J. Michael Straczynski and drawn by John Romita Jr., who's a heck of a guy, who's a wonderful guy. He used to be just a dependable source of comic book related conversation in beautiful Iowa City on the banks of the Iowa River. And is one of the most talented comic book artists ever, I think, and just gets better as he goes along. He's just amazing. And this big fat anthology covers almost the whole of pretty much the whole of that run. And boy, oh boy, does that run have great things in it. It is, in my opinion, the last truly great Spider-Man run that we have seen. And oh my God, it has famous things. The most famous thing in it is, of course, the 9/11 issue, where real world events intrude on Spider-Man's fictional universe in a way that, according to the Marvel editors at the time, they had no choice. They just had to do it. Manhattan has always been the home of Marvel superheroes. They spread out all over, but Manhattan has always been their home, and all of a sudden there's this massive attack on Lower Manhattan. And the 9/11 Spider-Man issue had an all-black cover, and it had weird combination. Keep in mind, it was fresh off the presses. It was when nothing was known. It was when history was still happening and the wound was still incredibly raw. And it's an odd issue to read, gut punching, but really, really odd. That's probably the most famous thing in this run, but there's lots of other great stuff. Lots. There's a two-part story where Spider-Man teams up with Loki. Who in these two-parters is not particularly villainous. He's kind of just a god. He doesn't really know much about mortals, doesn't really care much about them. He has a concern of his own that involves a bad guy, and Spider-Man temporarily helps him out. There's a great moment in there. Straczynski is great with little quiet moments. Spider-Man, lost in thought, walking down the wall of the outside wall of an apartment building in New York, when he walks right by a guy who offers him popcorn. He takes some popcorn. And there's one moment in that Loki two-parter where he and Spider-Man are sitting on the top of a roof. They're just sitting next to each other like little kids. They almost look like. Romita Jr. Intentionally draws Loki a normal-looking, skinny guy, basically the same as Spider-Man. And Spider-Man is giving him his first hot dog. They're just talking, and they're sitting on the roof eating hot dogs. And Loki says, "What are the green things?" And Spider-Man says, "Nobody knows." And there's also a fantastic storyline in here where Spider-Man faces a fairly by-the-numbers villain named Morlun, who is able to detect him wherever he is, wants to kill him, and is physically unstoppable. He can't fly. He can't blast energy beams out of his eyes or his hands or anything like that. But he is much stronger than Spider-Man, and he's totally invulnerable. And he doesn't stop. He's inexorable. He wants to find and kill Spider-Man. And Spider-Man, it just, as luck of the draw will have it, no other superheroes are around in Manhattan to help him out. He actually uses a payphone to try and call the Fantastic Four. There's no one there to help him out. He has to fight this guy on his own, and he is just going to lose. And he comes up with, at the last minute, a desperate plan that might work to save his life. But that's the conclusion of that issue, is the moment where Aunt May, Peter Parker's saintly Aunt May, who until the new TV show, the new movies, until then, Aunt May was elderly. now Peter Parker somehow has an aunt who's 10 years older than he is. Don't get me started on the Tom Holland movies. Okay, don't get me started. It used to be that Aunt May was an elderly woman and was worried about her poor nephew Peter, who she thought was very frail and very weak. The running gag being that he's actually Spider-Man, who she doesn't like at all. And at the conclusion of the Morlun storyline, she finds out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and it's incredible. Just incredible. Not only that moment is beautifully done by John Romita Jr., but also the follow-up issue, when they have it out, when they talk out what this means. Just wonderful stuff. Lots and lots of great stuff like that. And the upshot of all of this comic book talk, of the fact that I had this full docket of things I was going to the LCS to get, is I didn't get any of them except for the floppy issues. Now, the floppy issues is a Conan trifecta. First from Dynamite is the 4th issue of the current storyline of Red Sonja, where she and a cousin of hers are trying to fight off a gigantic invading army. They have nobody, they have nothing, they have no men, no equipment, no organization, no money, no nothing. And the army that's invading, by this wonderfully written bad guy, he's just so funny. The whole thing, this whole storyline of Red Sonja is just funny. In addition to being really cool, really good, it's also funny. The bad guy is he's self-aware enough to be funny. And we're following this plot line all along. I stopped for a minute, but I'm back again, because this is a perfect example. These 3 things, I got Red Sonja from Dynamite. I got Savage Sword of Conan, and I got Conan the Barbarian. And the reason I felt a little abashed when I got them, because I realized when I missed one issue of each of those 3, I realized that suddenly that was all it took to get me to start trade waiting. I'm not going to trade wait comics that are this good. I'm not going to do it. So I got the latest issue of Red Sonja. Will you look at this Amanda Conner cover? Will you just look at that? That is just incredible. Look at that cover. That is amazing. I went to the back where Dynamite gives you the gallery of all the different variant covers for this issue, and I lucked out. It's by far the best one. It's incredible. Just incredible. And the issue's terrific too. It has some genuinely funny tossed off lines, but it is serious. I was worried that the humor might get out of hand, because these things, Red Sonja, Conan, Bran McMorn, Solomon Kane, these are not comic characters, but boy, oh boy, what a series this is. So I got that. And then I got the 2 Marvel, two of the Marvel Conan books. Conan the Barbarian #4. This is written by Jason Aaron and drawn by Mahmoud Asrar, and this is The Life and Death of Conan Part 6. This is what it looks like, and this is a weird, disjointed story. The overall story, the thing that will animate the collection, the trade that will, I'm sure, come out of this. The Life and Death of Conan is all about this witch who meets him first a long time ago when he's just a boy, and who apparently is waiting his whole life. The more blood and guts, the more gore and destruction Conan encounters in his life, the more he gains a kind of sorceress momentum, and she can use that momentum. So I have a feeling this is all going to pull together in the end. If the writer manages to pull it off, it's all going to pull together to be a fairly big and fairly enjoyable story that does have a coherent plot. But the thing I've noticed about these issues of Conan the Barbarian in the half year that I've been buying this is that each one of them really stands alone. And it makes sense when you think about the plot line. The plot line is that all of these different events are giving Conan more power she can use, but the events still have to be told on their own. And that's what happens in this issue. In this issue, we get it's just beautiful, beautiful artwork, detailed and just lovely. And in this story, we get. I want to give you another panel. Yeah, look at this bottom panel. Just look at that. That is terrific. This is just fantastic Conan stuff. And the best part for me, for an old timer who read the original Conan the Barbarian at Marvel Comics, this doesn't read like those at all. It's a totally different sensibility for Conan. Still completely true to the character and the world, but totally different from anything that Roy Thomas would have done. I absolutely love the series. And then Savage Sword of Conan, which is the sister comic in Marvel's relaunch now, but once upon a time, it was a larger size magazine. I don't think I have any one of them in the room here. A magazine-sized Conan, also written by Roy Thomas, usually drawn by John Buscema, and the subject of one of those big omnibuses that I really wish I had. Sooner or later, I will get the Savage Sword of Conan Volume 1 as an omnibus, and Conan the Barbarian Volume 1 as an omnibus. Marvel came out with both of them, and I thought that I was in the pipeline to get them from Marvel, and I haven't yet, so I don't think I'm going to. But back then, Conan the Barbarian was a 4-color comic just on the newsstands, and Savage Sword of Conan was a magazine, a larger magazine in black and white with painted covers, and the difference meant a lot at the time. It meant that the magazines were free from the Comics Code Authority, so they could be gorier, they could be more explicit, that sort of thing. And now you look back now after... You look back now at Savage Sword of Conan, and it all seems fairly tame. And Marvel obviously considers that as well, because now the Savage Sword of Conan is just another comic book. There's no need to. And this is The Cult of Koga Thun, Part 5. We've been following this all along. This is written by Gregory Duggan and drawn just fantastically by Ron Garney. Ron Garney is so good. He is such a fantastic author. Look at this, the decapitated villain. I curse! And Conan just kicks the head. Look at that, a bag of snakes. Isn't that incredible? Ron Garney has an amazing sense for composition, look at that, for movement without stupid exaggerated motion lines. And this is just fantastic work. I've always loved his work, and this is just fantastic work. And the cover is going to strike a chord. To some old-time Conan fans, it's going to strike a chord. The cover is by Alex Ross, but some of you will think it's familiar. It will strike a chord in Conan enthusiasts. Let me help you out. This is Alex Ross's tribute, his homage to Barry Windsor Smith's great cover that was done in the 1970s, in 1974, I think. Look at that. Look, this is the full beauty of the thing. Barry Windsor Smith's set piece, just incredible. Conan, and the thing that made this so remarkable at the time was that Conan is hacked up. He's not just not your typical superhero who's just not taking any hits in battle. And Alex Ross makes sure to duplicate that in his. Just wonderful. That was a real treat to see these two, to see this little homage here. Those were the floppies that I got, and they were all successful. I'm just in loving this Conan, this Robert E. Howard Renaissance. I'm just loving it. But I hit problems with all the other stuff that I was planning on. Now, the omnibus, the big hardcover, at the last minute, it was there, and at the last minute I chickened out for a couple of reasons. One, $125 is highway robbery. If it comes to Barnes & Noble, where I have an employee discount, I can get it for much less than that, and I can get it for even less than that at plenty of places like In Stock Trades online that will have it for half the cover price, because the cover price is drastically inflated. So I just, much as I love the run and much as I gladly take the book, I didn't get it. Also, hampered by the fact that the whole run of J. Garfield Straczynski and John Romita Jr. has come out in trade paperbacks over time. There's a shelf of like 5 of them that I have. So, that it serves to remind me that I really love everything about this run. I just love it. But it also served to dissuade me because I already have access to these issues. I want that book, but I am not willing to pay $125 for it. When I find it for $50, I'll buy it. But this is just amazing stuff. And I was looking through this volume. See here, I'll show you. This is Aunt May, as John Romita Jr. draws her. That is Aunt May, and this particular volume has something that it's the reason I bought it. I admit, there's a huge fight. Battle that involves Spider-Man teaming up with Doctor Strange, the master of the mystic arts. And when it's all over, Doctor Strange gives Peter Parker a little casket. And the casket gives him 5 minutes with Uncle Ben, his father figure, who he loses in the first appearance of Spider-Man, who says, with great power comes great responsibility. He gets 5 minutes to talk to Uncle Ben, right there on the rooftop in Manhattan. And it's a great moment. It's a fantastic moment. And those of you who really, I don't know how many of you really know your comic book art, but you're going to see in a minute, you're going to see in an instant, the difference between this and this. And you know what that difference is? This is the very last time that John Romita Sr., John Romita Jr.'s father and the architect of the visual appearance of Spider-Man in Marvel Comics, it's the very last time he drew the character. It only draws the one panel of Spider-Man, that adventure panel. Here, let me get back to it, where he's looking back on his life. It's only that one panel. It's all the rest of it is Peter Parker and Uncle Ben. Got to me. It really got to me. I have a couple of issues of other comics where John Romita Jr. was inked by John Romita Sr. And those are incredible. But to have, at the end of a John Romita Jr. extravaganza of action and whatnot that he does so well, to have that quiet moment penciled by his father, just amazing. Those were the 2 reasons why I didn't get the big hardcover omnibus, is because I have the trade paperbacks, and the thing was just too expensive. I have the money. It's the principle of the thing. I don't want to pay for $125 for something when Marvel would be making a handsome profit off it at half that money. I will be a schmuck and just find it for a lower price. I hate to do that to my LCS, but I don't know. It just seemed egregious. That's all. And as to the 2 graphic novels, the hardcover and the paperback, the reason I didn't get them was much worse. The reason I didn't get them was much more of a thermometer on the industry. My LCS didn't have them. I asked, there's a kid who's fairly attentive, fairly remembers the customers, seems to like working with them. That in itself is an extreme rarity when it comes to retail. And he said they didn't get either one of them. So, I mean, the Marvel 80s volume was probably $30. The Astro City hardcover is probably another $30. I would gladly pay that today at my local comic shop, and I didn't, because they didn't have them. And it reminded me of the periods in my life when I have been lucky enough to live within striking distance of a real comic shop. My local comic shop right now is Newbury Comics, which is a chain throughout the American Northeast, at least. I don't know if there are Newbury Comics in California. But Newbury Comics has everything. They have tchotchkes, they have socks, they have a wall of Funko Pops, they have games. They don't, by any means, make their money off their comic books. In fact, in the new design of the Newbury Comics on Newbury Street, the comics are tucked away in the back on the 2nd floor. Their physical location in the shop could not be a better indicator of what the shop thinks of them as far as money making goes. But there have been times in my life, in Austin, for instance, in California, for a brief time when I was working in Cambridge, Massachusetts, across the river, I had access to the Great Million Year Picnic, a shop in Cambridge before that had very suspicious fire and then came back. There's a Million Year Picnic in Harvard Square now, but the Million Year Picnic before the fire had everything. And dedicated comic shops used to have everything. Everything that came out would be there. And I know what that's like. I know what it's like to have access to a shop like that, and I used to love that, knowing that if something came out, I would be able to find it there. They would have it. Of course they would. It'd be their job to have it. Who else would have it? Here, these are major releases. Astro City is not Marvel or DC, but it's a major release. It's a big thing. And also a new Marvel trade paperback. And the shop didn't have either one of them. And had no plans to get either one of them. Newbury Comics has a weird, appear to have a weird in-store policy where they don't particularly want to order anything for you. If you come in and say, okay, you don't have this hardcover graphic novel, it's $30, I'll gladly buy it if you get it for me. Their answer is no, we don't really do that. The comic book industry is in decline. Comic book stores are closing. Comic book sales are either down or flatlining, and they have been for years. And this doesn't make a whole lot of sense considering that Avengers Endgame is closing in on $2 trillion. There's obviously a comic book consuming public out there. I don't know. There's a lot of blame to go around. Certainly there are no shortage of channels on YouTube that assess blame in all directions. But today felt like an indictment to me. I went into my local comic shop and I spent, what is this, $12? What have we got here? These things are obscenely expensive. $4, yeah, $12. I went into my local comic shop and spent $12. I would gladly have spent $70. Today, me, not a hypothetical. Granted, I passed on a grotesquely overpriced omnibus hardcover, but I would still have spent $70 at the store, and I didn't do it. And it wasn't my fault. The things I wanted, the new releases for comic book specialty stores, weren't at my local comic shop. It felt like an indictment. It felt bad. I came out with 3 great Conan books. They gave me a great amount of pleasure to read. I'm sure they will give me a great amount of pleasure to reread, especially since the Conan story, these Conan Marvel issues are serializing a prose Conan stories. And those I sometimes save and just read a couple at a time. Nevertheless, I wanted to come out of my comic shop with a lot more. So that's comics for today. Unfortunately, I would have gladly flipped through those graphic novels with you. I'm glad I got a chance to talk about them and praise them to you. They certainly seem, I am familiar with the contents, partially at least, of both of them. And I'm glad I got to praise the Straczynski Spider-Man run. If you're not familiar with it and you're a Spider-Man fan, you're going to love it. I don't know about buying that hardcover, but you're going to love it when it eventually comes your way. But that's it. I was counting on showing you more, but I'll be content with a Conan trilogy to show you. And I'll wrap this up for now. This is a long comic book video, but I'll be back. We have plenty of other things to talk about. Thank you, BookTube.